The stage from Helena reached Cedar Bluff a little after noon. Clara Mercer climbed down with a child on her hip and two more holding tight to her skirts. Clara was 29 years old. Clara was a widow. And the first thing Clara did, standing in the Montana dust with her 3 children pressed against her, was say the thing she had been dreading to say for the whole long ride. Clara looked at the tall man waiting by the rail. This was Levi Hart. Clara had read Levi Hart's letters a dozen times on the journey, until the folds had gone soft. But a letter is paper, and a platform is real, and Clara had decided, somewhere past the last river crossing, that she would not let this man be trapped by his own politeness. So Clara said it plainly. Clara said it before Levi Hart could smile, before Levi could pretend, before he could do the kind thing and regret it later. "No one wants a bride with 3 children, Mr. Hart." Clara's voice was steady, though it cost her to keep it so. "I would understand if you have changed your mind. I would not blame you. I came all this way so that you could tell me to my face. A man should be allowed to say no to my face." Levi Hart did not answer right away. Levi Hart looked at Clara Mercer. Then Levi looked at the little girl on Clara's hip, who was not yet 4, and had a rag doll clutched under one arm. Then Levi looked at the boy of 7 and the watchful girl of 10, both of them holding their mother's skirts, as if the wind might take her. And then Levi Hart smiled. It was a slow smile. It was the smile of a man who had just been handed something he had wanted for a very long time and could hardly believe was being offered. "Mrs. Mercer," Levi said, "I always wanted a big family. I just never thought I would be lucky enough to get one all at once." Clara stood very still. The wind moved the dust around their feet. The littlest one, the girl on Clara's hip, was named Pearl, and Pearl looked at the tall stranger with the open, unworried face of a child who has not yet learned to be afraid of being too much. But Clara had learned it. Clara had learned it well, and so Clara did not smile back. "I want you to understand something, before this story goes any further. The hard part of this story is not what Levi Hart said on that platform. Levi said the kind thing, and Levi meant it. The hard part is that Clara Mercer did not believe him. Clara had been taught, by 2 years of hard living, that kindness toward a woman with 3 children was a thing that wore off, and a person cannot accept a gift they are certain will be taken back. The eldest child, the watchful girl, was named Etta. Etta was 10 years old, and Etta had her mother's habit of bracing for the worst. Etta looked up at this Levi Hart, and Etta did not loosen her grip on her mother's skirt one bit. The middle child, the boy, was named Caleb. Caleb was 7, and Caleb was already looking past the man at the horses tied by the rail, because Caleb was 7, and horses were horses. Levi Hart reached for Clara's trunk, which was the only trunk, because 3 children and 1 trunk was the whole of what Clara Mercer owned in the world. "Let's get you all out of this wind," Levi said. "It's a fair ride to the place. The little one looks tired." And Clara let him take the trunk, because there was nothing else to do. But Clara kept her arms tight around Pearl, and Clara kept her chin up, and Clara waited for the moment this kind man would remember what he had agreed to. To understand why Clara Mercer could not believe a kind word, you have to know what the last 2 years had done to her. So let me take you back, gently, before we go forward. Clara Mercer had been married to a good man named Daniel Mercer. Daniel and Clara had lived in a small town in Ohio, in a house that was not large but was warm, and they had 3 children, and they had been, for a time, ordinarily and quietly happy. Daniel Mercer worked at the mill. Clara kept the house and the children. It was a small life, and it was enough. Then a fever came through the town. It came in the winter, the way fevers did, moving house to house down the lane. The fever took the old and it took the young, and that winter it took Daniel Mercer, who was 31 and strong, and should have lived to be old. Daniel went from well to gone in 9 days. I want you to remember that fever. Remember how fast it moved, and how helpless Clara felt watching it. That fever matters later in this story, more than Clara could have known. After Daniel Mercer died, Clara was a widow with 3 children and very little money. Daniel had left some small savings, but small savings do not last long when there are 4 mouths and rent and a winter to get through. Clara took in sewing. Clara took in washing. Clara did everything a respectable woman could do, and it was not enough. And Clara watched the savings go down like water in a cracked jar. And here is the thing that hardened in Clara during those 2 years. It was not the work. Clara could work. It was the way people looked at her 3 children. The landlord looked at the children and saw 3 more reasons the rent might come up short. The few men who came around, after a respectable time, looked at the children, and Clara could see them counting the cost, counting the years. Clara watched a man's face change at her own table once, when Caleb knocked over a cup, and Clara understood, in that one changed face, exactly what she was now worth on the open market. A widow alone might be a prize. A widow with 3 children was a debt. So when Clara saw the advertisement, she almost did not answer it. The advertisement had been placed by a rancher in Montana Territory, a man seeking a wife, a man who wrote that he had a good house and good land and was lonesome on it. Clara read that advertisement 4 times. Then Clara wrote a letter, and in the very first letter, in the second line, before anything else, Clara wrote the truth. Clara wrote, "I am a widow, and I have 3 children, a girl of 10, a boy of 7, and a girl not yet 4, and I will not come without them, and I will not pretend they are less trouble than they are." Clara wrote that on purpose. Clara wrote it to scare the man off early, where it would cost nothing, rather than late, where it would break her. And then Clara waited for the silence that always came. But the silence did not come. What came was a letter back from Levi Hart. And Levi Hart's letter did not mention the children as a problem at all. Levi wrote about the land. Levi wrote about the long winters and the good summers. And at the end, almost as an afterthought, Levi wrote one line that Clara read so many times she could say it with her eyes closed. Levi wrote, "A house with children in it is the only kind of house I have ever wanted, so do not think you are bringing me trouble. You are bringing me the very thing I have been short of." Clara did not believe that line either. Clara thought it was a thing a lonely man writes to fill a page. But Clara was out of savings and out of time, and Montana was far from the changed faces of Ohio, and so Clara packed her one trunk and took her 3 children and came west to find out what a line in a letter was really worth. Now I will tell you about Levi Hart, because Clara did not yet know any of this, and it matters. Levi Hart was 34 years old. Levi had grown up in Missouri, in a house full to the rafters. Levi had been one of 7 children. 7. The house Levi grew up in was never quiet. There was always a child crying or laughing or underfoot. Always too many at the table. Always noise. And Levi had loved it, the way you only understand you loved a thing after it is gone. Because the house did not stay full. That is what happened to big families in those years. A fever, the same kind of fever that took Daniel Mercer, took 2 of Levi's brothers in a single hard week. The others grew up and scattered, the way children do, west and south and away. Levi's mother passed. Levi's father passed. And Levi Hart, who had built a fine ranch in Montana with his own 2 hands, found himself standing in a good house, on good land, in a silence so complete it rang in his ears at night. Levi had everything a man was supposed to want, and Levi would have traded a good deal of it for the sound of too many feet on the stairs. The Hart Ranch sat in a wide green fold of land an hour's ride from Cedar Bluff. The house was bigger than Clara had pictured. It had a real parlor and 4 rooms upstairs. And Clara, walking through it that first afternoon with Pearl on her hip, did a thing she could not help. Clara counted the rooms and thought, "There is space here for us to be small in. There is space here to stay out of his way." Because that was Clara's plan. In those first weeks, Clara's plan was to make her 3 children disappear. Not unkindly, But Clara had decided that the way to keep this arrangement alive was to make the children as little trouble as a family of 3 children could possibly be. Clara hushed Caleb when Caleb got loud. Clara kept Pearl in the kitchen, underfoot of no one but herself. Clara had Etta help with the chores until Etta, who was only 10, looked tired in a way a child should not look. Clara was trying to prove that her children were not a cost. And the strange thing, the thing Clara did not see, was that her trying was the only thing in that house that made anyone unhappy. Levi Hart noticed it within the week. Levi noticed that the boy Caleb went quiet and stiff whenever Levi came into a room, like a boy who had been told 100 times not to bother the man. Levi noticed that Clara swept Pearl out of the parlor the moment Levi sat down, as if a small girl with a rag doll were a thing that needed apologizing for. And Levi noticed that Etta, the watchful one, watched him the way you watch a dog you have not decided is friendly. It was Caleb who broke the careful quiet first, and it was over the horses. Caleb was 7, and Caleb had been staring at the horses since the platform, and one morning Caleb could not stand it anymore, and slipped out to the corral while Clara's back was turned. Clara found the corral empty of her son, and her heart went into her throat, and Clara ran out calling Caleb's name, already braced for Levi's anger, already composing the apology. But there was no anger to apologize to, because there was Caleb sitting on the top rail of the fence, and there was Levi Hart standing beside him, and Levi had his hand on the neck of a gentle old bay mare, showing Caleb how to let a horse smell your hand before you touch it. Levi was not angry. Levi was talking low and easy, the way you talk to both a nervous boy and a nervous horse, and Caleb was listening with his whole body. Clara stopped at the corner of the barn. Clara watched, and Clara did not know what to do with what she was seeing, so she said, too sharply, "Caleb, you mustn't trouble Mr. Hart." Levi Hart looked over at Clara then, and Levi said a thing Clara would turn over in her mind for many nights. Levi said, "Mrs. Mercer, a boy who wants to learn horses is not trouble. A boy who wants to learn horses is the best company a man can keep. Let him be." And then Levi went back to the mare and the boy, and Clara stood there with her apology still in her mouth, unused, not knowing where to put it. Pearl was the next to cross the careful line Clara had drawn. Pearl was not yet 4, and Pearl had a rag doll named Button, a soft, worn thing with one button eye, the doll Pearl had carried down off the stage that first day. And one evening Button's loose arm finally gave way and tore at the seam, and Pearl wept the bottomless, end-of-the-world weeping of a very small child who has lost the only thing that is wholly her own. Clara was upstairs with Etta. It was Levi Hart who was in the kitchen when Pearl's doll came apart, and Clara, hurrying down the stairs at the sound of crying, stopped on the bottom step. Because there was big Levi Hart, the rancher, the man with hands like saddle leather, sitting at the kitchen table with Pearl's torn rag doll and a needle and thread, sewing Button's arm back on. Levi's stitches were big and clumsy. Levi had clearly never sewn a doll in his life, but Levi was doing it, slow and careful, with Pearl leaning against his knee watching, her tears already drying, perfectly sure that this large, quiet man could fix anything. Remember Pearl's doll. Remember Button and the clumsy stitches Levi Hart put in that little torn arm. That doll comes back at the end of this story, and when it does, you will want to remember this kitchen, and this needle, and this man who did not know how to sew, but sat down and tried anyway. Etta was the hardest. Etta was 10, and Etta had watched her father die, and Etta had watched the changed faces in Ohio same as her mother had, because children see far more than grown people credit them with seeing. Etta had decided, somewhere in those 2 hard years, that her job was to help her mother and to trust no one. And Etta did her job well. Etta was polite to Levi Hart. Etta was helpful. And Etta gave Levi nothing of herself at all, and watched him, and waited for him to show the face she was sure he was hiding. Levi Hart did not push Etta. That was the wise thing Levi did, though Levi could not have told you it was wise. Levi simply let Etta watch. Levi did not buy Etta's trust with gifts. Levi did not make a show of winning her. Levi just kept being the same man, day after day. The man who let Caleb learn the horses and sewed Pearl's doll and never once raised his voice. And Levi let Etta take all the time she needed to see that the same man on Monday was still the same man on Friday. For a watchful child, there is no gift like that. A watchful child does not want presents. A watchful child wants to find out that the floor will not fall away. And through all of it, Clara Mercer would not let herself exhale. Clara saw Levi with Caleb and the horses. Clara saw the clumsy stitches in Button's arm. Clara saw Levi giving Etta room to breathe. And still Clara waited for it to end. Because Clara had seen kindness before. Clara had seen kindness wear thin and wear out. And Clara had decided it was safer to keep her children small and her heart smaller than to believe in a thing that would only be taken back. It was Pearl who took sick first. Of course it was Pearl, the littlest, not yet 4. It started as a flush in her cheeks and a crossness she could not explain, and by the second evening, Pearl was hot to the touch and would not eat, and by the third night Pearl was burning, truly burning, with the kind of fever that makes a small body shake. And Clara Mercer came undone in a way she had not let herself come undone in 2 years, because Clara had seen a fever like this before. Clara had watched a fever like this take Daniel Mercer in 9 days, in Ohio, in the winter. Clara sat on the edge of Pearl's bed with a cool cloth, and her hands would not stop shaking, and the old terror rose up in her, the terror of watching and being helpless, the terror she had carried west and thought she had left behind. Levi Hart heard Clara moving in the night and came to the door. Levi took one look at Pearl, flushed and shivering, and one look at Clara's white face, and Levi did not say a single soft, useless thing. Levi said, "I'll ride for Doc Pierce. It's a hard hour in the dark, but the mare knows the road." And before Clara could even answer, Levi Hart was pulling his boots on. Now here is where Clara's fear and Clara's hope ran straight at each other in the dark. Because a small, cruel voice in Clara, a voice 2 years in the making, said, "Now he sees. Now Levi Hart sees what a ready-made family truly costs. A sick child in the night. A doctor's bill. A fever that might run through all 3 of them. Now," the voice said, "Levi will start counting. The way they all start counting." Clara almost wished he would. It would have been easier to lose this thing now than to keep hoping, but Levi Hart did not count. Levi rode the hard hour to Cedar Bluff in the black dark and brought Doc Pierce back before dawn. And when Doc Pierce had seen Pearl and said it was a bad fever, but a child's fever, the kind that breaks if it is watched and cooled and kept, Levi Hart did not go to bed. Levi sat up. Levi sat up the rest of that night, and the whole of the next day, and the next night after that, taking turns with Clara at Pearl's bedside, wringing the cloth, talking low to the little girl when she fretted, carrying her to the window when she wanted to see the stars. On the second night of watching, with Pearl finally sleeping a real sleep, and the worst of the fever turning at last, Clara Mercer sat across the small bed from Levi Hart in the lamplight, both of them gray with tiredness, and Clara finally asked the thing she had been holding. Clara asked it in a whisper so as not to wake Pearl. Clara said, "Why are you doing all this? She is not yours. None of them are yours. You could have a wife with no children at all. Why would you sit up 2 nights for a child that is not yours?" And Levi Hart looked across the sleeping child at Clara, and Levi was too tired to be anything but honest. "Mrs. Mercer," Levi said, "I had 2 brothers die of a fever like this one, when I was a boy. I remember my mother sitting up just like this. I could not do a thing for my brothers. I was too small. I have carried that my whole life." Levi looked down at Pearl. "I can do something for this one. Do you understand? You think these children are a thing you are asking me to carry. They are not. They are the thing I have been waiting to be allowed to carry." Remember the fever that took Daniel Mercer in Ohio? The one I told you to hold on to. And now you see why I asked. Because the same kind of fever that had taken Clara's husband and taken Levi's brothers when Levi was a helpless boy had come again. And this time it did not take. This time there was a man who would ride an hour in the dark, and a doctor brought back before dawn, and two people sitting up across a small bed until the fever turned. This time the fever broke. Pearl woke on the third morning hungry and cross, and entirely herself, and asked for Button, and that was how they knew she was well. Etta saw all of it. The watchful one. Etta had not slept much either, those 2 nights, because Etta did not sleep when her family was afraid. And Etta watched Levi Hart ride out in the dark, and watched Levi come back with the doctor, and watched Levi sit up 2 nights for her baby sister. And somewhere in those 2 nights, the floor that Etta had been so sure would fall away, did not fall away. It held. And a watchful child, who finds that the floor holds, is a child who can finally, slowly, begin to stand on it. It was Etta, not Clara, who said the first true thing. On the 3rd morning, when Pearl was well, and the house could breathe again, Etta found Levi Hart at the kitchen table, and Etta stood in front of him in the careful way she did everything, and Etta said, "Thank you for getting the doctor for Pearl." And then Etta, 10 years old, added the thing that mattered. Etta said, "My pa would have done that." And then Etta turned red and hurried off, because she had not meant to say so much. But she had said it. And Levi Hart sat very still at that table for a long while after, because he understood exactly what a watchful child had just handed him, and he knew it was the most precious thing in that house. The talk that mattered most happened a week after Pearl was well. It was evening. The children were asleep, all 3 of them, in the upstairs rooms that Clara had once thought of as places to be small in. Clara came down to the kitchen and found Levi Hart still up, mending a length of harness by the lamp. Clara sat down across from Levi, and Clara, who had kept her chin up and her heart small for 2 years, found that she could not keep them up and small anymore. The fever had cracked something open in her, so Clara said the true thing at last. Clara said, "I have been waiting for you to change your mind since the day I got off that stage. I have been keeping the children quiet, and keeping myself out of your way, because I was so sure, that if I just stayed small enough, you would not notice how much you had taken on, and you would not send us away." Levi Hart put down the harness. Levi listened. Levi was good at listening. Clara had learned, better than he was at sewing dolls. "In Ohio," Clara went on, and her voice shook now, "I watched men sit at my table and count my children like a bill they were not sure they wanted to pay. I watched their faces change, and I learned that a woman with 3 children is a thing the world treats as too much, not as a gift, as a burden a kind man might shoulder for a while and then set down. I came here believing that about myself, Mr. Hart. I think I still believe it. I do not know how to stop." And now Levi Hart told Clara the whole of it. Not the short version from the letter, the whole of it. Levi told Clara about the house in Missouri with 7 children in it, and the noise, and the too many at the table. Levi told her about the 2 brothers the fever took in 1 week, and his mother sitting up just as Clara had sat up with Pearl. Levi told her about the others scattering, west and south and away, and his mother passing, and his father passing, and the day Levi realized he was standing alone in a good house, on good land, in a silence that rang. "I built all this," Levi said, and he looked around the quiet kitchen, and every nail I drove, I was thinking it was for a house full of people, and then the house was finished and there was no one in it but me. Do you know what that is like, Mrs. Mercer? To get the thing you worked for and find the people it was for are all gone, or grown, or never came. Then Levi Hart said the words that Clara Mercer would keep for the rest of her life, the words she would repeat to Etta and Caleb and Pearl when they were grown, and asked how it had all begun. Levi leaned forward in the lamplight, and Levi said, "You keep telling me you brought me 3 children, like it is a debt I am too kind to refuse. I need you to hear me, Clara. You did not bring me a burden. You brought me back the only thing my money and my land could never buy. You brought the noise back into my house. You brought feet on the stairs. There is not a man alive who wanted your 3 children more than I do, because there is not a man alive who has been as lonesome in a full-sized house as I have." It was the first time Levi had called her Clara and not Mrs. Mercer. Clara noticed. And Clara, who had not cried in front of anyone in 2 years, who had kept her chin up through the fever and the funeral, and the cracked jar of savings going dry, finally put her face in her hands at that kitchen table and wept. Not from sorrow, from the terrible relief of setting down a weight you have carried so long you forgot it was a weight. Levi Hart did not reach across the table and grab at her, the way a lesser man might. Levi waited, and when Clara had cried herself quiet, Levi said one more thing, plain and steady. Levi said, "We can be married proper whenever you are ready. No sooner. But I would be obliged if you would stop keeping those children quiet on my account. This house was built for noise. Let it be noisy." And Clara Mercer laughed, a wet and broken and real laugh. And Clara said yes. Not just yes to the marriage, yes to the larger thing, yes to believing it. Which, for Clara, was the harder yes by far, and the one that had taken a fever and 2 sleepless nights and a man sewing a doll to finally win. Clara Mercer and Levi Hart were married in the little church at Cedar Bluff that autumn, with all 3 children standing up front, which the minister said was the first wedding he had performed where the bride arrived with her own row of family already in the pews. Caleb learned the horses. By the next summer, Caleb could saddle the gentle old bay himself. And Levi Hart told anyone who would listen in town that the boy had a natural hand, and Caleb glowed under it the way a boy glows when a man he loves is proud of him. Pearl grew, the way the littlest ones do, fast and sideways, and Pearl followed Levi everywhere, and Levi let her, even when following meant underfoot, and Etta, the watchful one. It took Etta the longest, because trust that is hard won is trust that holds. But there came a day, near a year on, when Etta called Levi Hart something other than Mr. Hart. Etta did it quietly, without ceremony, the way Etta did everything. Etta just said, "Pa, the gates come loose again," as if she had been saying it her whole life. And Levi Hart had to turn away and look hard at the gate for a moment before he could answer her, because his eyes had gone wet, and a man does not like to let his oldest girl see him cry over a loose gate. Remember Pearl's rag doll, Button, with the arm that Levi sewed back on with his big clumsy stitches that first week? That doll lasted years. Pearl carried it until she was far too old for dolls, and the clumsy stitches in its arm never came out, because Pearl would not let anyone fix them properly. When Clara once offered to sew the arm neat, Pearl, who was older by then, said no. Pearl said, "Leave it. Pa sewed that. That's how I know it's mine." And Clara left it. Of course Clara left it. The house was never quiet again. There were feet on the stairs and spills at the table and too many voices at supper. And Levi Hart, who had once stood alone in a good house in a silence that rang, would sometimes stop in the middle of all that noise and just listen to it, with a look on his face like a man hearing music. Clara saw that look more than once. And every time Clara saw it, Clara remembered the platform at Cedar Bluff, and the dust, and the dread, and the things she had said before he could be kind. No one wants a bride with 3 children. And she remembered what Levi Hart had answered, the words that turned out to be the truest words anyone ever said to her. "I always wanted a big family. I just never thought I would be lucky enough to get one all at once."